and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched the last episode of the show, liked, commented. I think there's a few comments I've yet to catch up with, but I'll obviously try and do that later on today. From the comments, it certainly seems like you enjoyed the episode, and it's always good to get one of those sort of episodes I suppose say out of the way, but you know, off one's chest, I suppose. But obviously this week we're kind of back to normal. I've come to praise Caesar, not to stick my knife in him, so to speak. Well, it's been a bit of a long overdue tasting. Part of the reason for today's episode of the show was a good friend of mine, Andy Holbrook, dropped into the shop a couple of weeks ago with some samples for me to try, and it kind of reminded me that it dropped last year. He'd done the same, and it was my intention to use them in an episode of the show, but because there was only 3 of them, it was another one of those, well, how do I kind of sort of work them into a sort of like a viable episode of the show? I mean, obviously I could have done just a sort of random general sort of episode, but I always like to have some kind of meaning to the shows, and so today's episode of the show is called just Past and Present, and I'm basically looking at the Lowlands region of Scotland and 2 distilleries that represent both of those, the past and the present. Obviously Bladnoch and Lochlea. I think you can figure out which one is which. Now obviously I don't really need to say an awful lot about Bladnoch. I've been a huge fan of the distillery for absolutely donkey's years. I've done, I would think, at least 4, maybe possibly even more episodes of the show over the last 10 years or so on them. Well, so I don't really need to say an awful lot, apart from, you know, certainly when Raymond was running the distillery, I was a big supporter of what he was doing, tried to make the sales and all that kind of stuff, did the reviews, and, you know, obviously, I guess when the history of the distillery is written, I wouldn't even garner a footnote in that, but I like to think that, you know, back in the day I sort of did my bit, shall we say. The other distillery we're looking at is Lochlea. So this is the sort of like, not the only obviously new distillery in the Lowlands, but part of the future of the Lowlands, the sort of the new wave of distilleries that started to appear sort of earlier in the 2000s, and well, 2010s I should say, like Lochlea. So basically Lochlea was, the project was kind of, I guess, first muted, I suppose, for want of a better word, back in 2014. I guess it took some time to get the ball rolling, get the finances in, that kind of thing, and eventually I believe roughly around about £6 million was ploughed into the venture, and obviously the distillery started production in August of 2018. Now it's very much a sort of a modern distillery. It's all very ecological, although they don't sort of ram the whole eco thing down your throat. It's what's that horrible term that's been overly used, grain to bottle or something like that, and in essence it is the distillery itself was built on the site of a farm, so they have their own barley, and everything is done sort of on site, so some obviously mashing, distillation, etc, etc. Everything is used, so sort of like the draft goes to feed the animals. It's all very sustainable, and of course, as we well know, that is the big word at the moment, sustainability. And part of that obviously is what enticed John Campbell from Lefroy to basically become part of the distillery setup, and obviously have an influence upon the style of the spirit that was going to be produced at Lochlea. And as he says, basically it was such a unique proposition that he couldn't turn it down. They've got their own water source, their own barley, everything is done sort of there on site, it's all self-contained. And you know, so obviously he had, well, I wouldn't say, well, probably had full control over how the distillery was going to operate. I don't know if he was sort of involved in the planning stages, possibly, I don't know. But, you know, it's obviously a blueprint for the modern distillery, and obviously the first whiskey was released for sale in January of last year. So I think, you know, it's very apt to sort of like, you know, say, look, okay, so the distillery has now been releasing for a year. We have a core bottling called Our Barley, and they have released several limited releases, a couple of which we're obviously going to look at today, which they've kind of tied into the seasons around the farm, so sort of sowing, ploughing, fallow, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it really it appeals to me. I love the sort of the whole grounding and the whole ethos, but of course all of that is secondary to whether the spirit, or as I say, the juice in the bottle is good. And obviously, well, we'll find out, we'll see how it stacks up to the distillery of the past, as in Bladnoch. So I'm going to do things slightly different this week. Normally I tend to, if I'm going to look at a couple of distilleries, I'll look at one and then the other. This week I've decided I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'm going to kind of mix them into, just because I feel like it, to be honest with you. I just thought that was a nice idea. So I guess enough waffle. Let's have a look at today's lineup. So we'll kick off with Bladnoch. This is a bottling called Vinaya, bottled at 46.7. I think Vinaya means harmony or something like that in whatever the language is. And it's a vatting, it's a no-age statement bottling, and it's a vatting of first fill bourbon and first fill sherry, and obviously this sample came to me in 2021. Then we're going to look at the first, the core release of the Lochlea. So this is called Our Barley. It's like a lot of the new distilleries, they have decided to go down the route of using several different cask types. So we have ex-Maker's Mark Bourbon, we have Miguel Martin Sherry Butts, and STR Wine Barriques. So nothing unusual about that. Like I said, a lot of the other distilleries are doing very much the same. Filey Bay in Yorkshire is certainly sort of playing around with all these sort of different casks, although obviously their flagship is aged wholly in American oak. Lindores Abbey, again, very similar kind of use of casks. So it's a very sort of modern thing to do, and you know, basically use the cask types to sort of add extra complexity to the spirit. What one hopes in all of this is, of course, is that you get some kind of essence or some kind of idea of the character of the spirit, and hope that all the sort of different oak casks don't kind of just you know, make it into a one-dimensional mess. So obviously we will see if that's the case. Bottling number 3 is back to Bladnoch. This is the limited release 10-year-old, 46.7, I believe, released in 2020. So if that was the case, then this would probably be some of the last spirit that Raymond ran off the stills. As you may or may not remember, the history of Bladnoch, basically production ceased pretty much in 2010. Although sort of obviously Raymond carried on running the distillery for a few years after that. Basically the production costs were becoming so high that it became sort of, I believe, untenable, which is why the guy that currently owns it, whose name completely eludes me and I didn't make a note of it, sort of stepped in and purchased the distillery back in, what was it, 2017, 18, something like that, I believe. But of course, I mean, that's all by the by, and I'm obviously not going to sort of rake up those coals. I did that. Well, I've done that on several occasions. So we're just looking at the spirit. It's all that matters today. Then we're moving back to Lochlea and looking at one of the limited releases. This was called the Harvest Edition, first crop. Going again bottled at 46%. The cask makeup for this one slightly tweaked, and I'm assuming that this is the proportions are like with most distilleries. When they sort of give you the sort of breakdown of casks, they give you what the majority of casks are first, and then sort of so on and so forth. So this is first is port, export casks, export pipes I should say, followed by first fill Miguel Martin Oloroso casks and first fill Maker's Mark X Bourbon casks. So be interesting to see. As you can see, it's not hugely dark, so one imagines that even though the sort of port is one assumes the main cask in that, it hasn't added a huge amount of sort of dark porty colour. Maybe it's refill port, possibly. I don't honestly know, is the honest answer. Maybe we'll get an inkling when we get to taste it. Then we're going to move back to Bladnoch. This is the 2021 release of the 19-year-old, again bottled at 46.7%, wholly aged in ex Pedro Ximenez cask. Probably shouldn't have put it in the black claim can, should I? So you can see the colour, but anyway, that's just the way they kind of fell. And then finally we're going to go back to Lochlea for the most recent release, and no, I haven't hammered the entire bottle in about a month. This was kind of leftovers from last month's whisky tasting when I showed this, and this is the Ploughing edition. Now, and again, like I said, they've kind of tailored each of the releases to try and represent the various sort of phases of the farm, I suppose. So what they've done with this is they have taken their spirit and aged it in ex-Islay casks. So again, you know, something that other distilleries have followed suit, not wanting to do a complete you know, peated mash run through the stills. They've decided to go down the aging it in ex-Islay casks route, and so it's always interesting to see how much influence those casks have had upon the spirit. So yeah, quite looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a really interesting tasting, and well, let's kick off with a bit of Bladnoch. Right, okay, so let's see what the vignette gives us. Now, obviously I have no direct dealings at all these days with Bladnoch, certainly not since the distillery was sold. So probably unlikely that I'll get the opportunity to do another Bladnoch episode of the show. But so let's have a look at this then, shall we? Quite fresh, quite estery. It's almost in the modern style of lowland distilling. It's got that lovely kind of almost bubblegummy white fruit, that sort of estery fruit, a bit of vanilla, some touch of sherry, nice balance of the casks here, a little bit of spiciness, it's a touch of chocolate. It's a little perfumed possibly, and like I said, the bubblegummy note is not too intrusive. There is some barley notes, there is that, I think the alcohol is kind of keeping it in check, and I think if it had been bottled at certainly less than this ABV, I think that would have been quite overt, shall we say. But you know, harmonious, I would certainly agree with that. I think it's an absolutely lovely nose. So the pass on. It's a little bit more sherry noticeable on the palate, kind of opens up with the dried fruit before moving into barley, white fruits again, slightly estery, a little bit of banana, some vanilla. Sherry kind of continues throughout really, it kind of lingers quite nicely on the palate. There's a little bit of grippiness, a little bit of spice, some slightly chocolatey tannins. Yeah, on the whole, I think that was an absolutely gorgeous bottling. I think it's still available, I believe. I must admit I didn't look at the price of said bottle. I know that certainly when Bladnoch relaunched, their stuff was quite expensive. And I certainly remember whatever the, I can't remember whatever the 20-year-old was called now, but there was a 20-odd-year-old, and that was well over 200 quid, which was a lot of money then. Well, it's still a lot of money now, isn't it? But so I don't know quite what that's retailing for, but I mean, if that's sensible money, that's a lovely whiskey. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Our Barley. Now, another thing that I really liked about the Lochlea distillery is its pricing. Now, they, unlike, say, Annandale, for example, and this is no no criticism, I guess, of Annandale. They decided that they wanted to go for the collector's market, fine. But Lochlea decided they were going to do the exact opposite, again, a bit like Lindor's Abbey. And so the pricing has been kept to sort of like, you know, a really nice sub 50 quid, 49.95. And you know, it encourages customers to purchase and drink and enjoy the spirit rather than collect it, which, you know, absolutely fine. I mean, you know, I have no issue with collecting, but it's just kind of nice to see a new distillery kind of going, yep, we're going to be completely sensible about our pricing. So anyway, let's see what the Our Barley gives us. Now, that's a lovely nose. Lots of distillery character, as I expected, as I knew, I should say, having tasted this before. They have gone down the sort of like the estery, fruity, long fermentation, and create a spirit that's obviously ready to bottle at a relatively young age, around about sort of 4 or so. Touch of sherry, a little bit of dried red fruit, some spice, some lovely chocolatey tannins. It's a little fresher and a little crisper than the Bladnoch. It's a beautifully balanced nose. I really like this. It's got that. It's got exactly what I would expect. It's got complexity that has been gained from not only the character of the spirit, but also the cask types that have been involved as well. And it's just absolutely gorgeously harmonious, absolutely wonderful. Let's see what that's like. Opens up with a little bit more oilier barley kind of character, and a touch more of the sort of winey STR casks. Some sweeter barley and American oats and vanillins follow on the mid palate, and finally a little bit of sweet dried sherried fruit comes through on the finish. A little bit of spice, marzipan. I mean, again, absolutely gorgeous, lovely, lovely progression. And considering that the spirit is only, like I said, about 4 years old, it is incredibly complex and enjoyable. I mean, I think this is going to be really intriguing distillery to sort of keep an eye on, to see how the spirit evolves. And I'm guessing that over time, maybe they will start to sort of, you know, shift more towards, you know, more American oak, less of the other two casks, possibly. I don't know. Maybe they'll kind of stick with this as the recipe for Our Barley. Who knows? But I think that's a bloody good whiskey. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old limited release. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Now, this reminds me more of Bladnoch, or shall we say sort of Raymond era Bladnoch. It's a weightier spirit. It's more dried straw-like barley. Some apricot, tangerine, pear, some lovely buttery vanilla, touch of earth, lime. I mean, beautiful, beautiful nose. just absolutely classic Bladnoch, clean as a whistle. I mean, you know, some bottlings from from Bladnoch haven't been, shall we say, scrupulously clean in the past, and one could argue that was part of the appeal, I suppose. But this is just absolutely textbook Bladnoch as I remember it. It's got that sort of straw-like, slightly aromatic quality, really complex, lovely citrus note coming through. I mean, that's just a superb spirit. I mean, it really is. Let's see what it passes like. Bit more oak on the palate, a little bit quite grippy to start off with. Takes a while for the juiciness of the barley, the straw, and the sort of the sweeter vanillins to sort of move in. There's a little bit of almost kind of Turkish delight, a little bit of rose petal, cereal, some spices, lovely spices in actual fact. They really do tingle on the tongue on the finish. A little bit of honey, malt, more barley. That's a very, very good whiskey. It really is. Plenty of complexity, good length, lovely progression. God, what more do you want? Right, okay, so let's move on to the Lochlea Harvest Edition. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? The port is noticeable straight off the bat, but it's not an overwhelming port character. It's soft, juicy red fruits, dusty tannins, but again, plenty of that sort of estery white fruit, apricot, pear, apple, a little bit of vanilla, maybe not quite so much American oak, as that is the sort of like the third fiddle. Certainly a little bit more spicy sherry character coming through. A little bit of chocolate, some almost kind of tea leafy kind of notes. Yeah, overall I like the balance on this. I think it's again a lovely whiskey. Got plenty of complexity. Again, the sort of the casks kind of work really nicely. The blend that's been put together, one assuming John Campbell was responsible for putting this blend together, and it just shows a lovely touch, a lovely balance, and none of the individual elements overwhelms. And again, it's just really harmonious. It's a lovely nose. The palate is just gorgeously understated. It's not sort of trying to hit you with anything wild and woolly. It's just relaxed, balanced. Again, kicks off with the port notes, the spicy red, or subtly spicy red fruits, a little bit of tannin, a little bit of chocolate, moves into vanilla briefly before the sherry kind of comes in with some dried fruits, a little bit of spice, gorgeously supple, mouth-watering, and the spirit counter kind of outlives all of the casks and comes through right at the very end, back with the sort of like the white fruits, the estery, apricot, almost kind of banana note as well, kind of coming through, white peach, that kind of thing. It's just a gorgeous whiskey. It really ticks all my boxes. This is the sort of whiskey that I love to drink, and you know, I'm more than happy to sort of like champion this the Lochlea distillery, because I just think they're doing such a great job. So Right, okay, so let's move on to the PX matured Bladnoch 19-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Actually, it's quite elegant for something that's been wholly matured in PX casks. It's obviously got the PX character, the grapey, winey, treacly, dried fruit, toffee, raisin, ginger, but it's got a lightness to it. All right, that you're kind of having a search for the distillery character, and there is a little bit of it, a little bit of barley, a little bit of that sort of straw-like note. But you know what? I don't dislike the nose. I think the nose is lovely. I personally would prefer the 10-year-old because of the nuance and complexity isn't quite there on here, but you can smell it's got some maturity to it. So overall, I don't think that's a particularly bad nose. So pass on. Again, there's a lightness there to the palate, a citricness, citricness, is that a proper word? Citrusness, you kind of get what I'm angling at here. It's not a chunky sherry monster. I mean, yes, the sherry is very noticeable, it is very treacly, dried fruit, toffee, chocolate, that kind of thing, but there's a lightness there. It has a bit of a lift. There is something else happening. Okay, the barley notes are sort of like the distillery character may be playing second fiddle, quite a lot of second fiddle here, to the sherry, but it's got a lovely length to it. Harmonious again to a certain extent. Ginger, lightly spicy, lightly tannic on the aftertaste. I mean, it's a lovely whiskey if you like sherry, but you don't want a sort of like, you know, a big overt sherry monster. I mean, like I said, personally, I prefer the 10-year-old, but I can see that this has a place, and at the end of the day, is a good whiskey. So there you go. Right, okay, so finally a bit of peat. So let's see how much influence the casks have had on the spirit. Quite a lot in actual fact. It's quite salty, fresh, crisp. A reasonable amount of peat. It's that sort of kind of more salty kind of peat. It's not medicinal, not overly medicinal. It has again, I'm getting the spirit character, I'm getting the sort of like the estery white fruit, the peach, the pear, apricot. Give it a bit of time and don't aerate it, and the peat kind of like just settles down, and you get some of the sweeter barley notes kind of coming through. Yeah, I like it. I think it works quite nicely in actual fact. Again, I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, you know, if you've spent half your working life at a distillery that uses heavily peated malt, it's going to be kind of like in your veins, really, isn't it, at the end of the day? So, you know, and I don't suppose it's probably sort of stretching the boundaries to wonder where those casks actually came from. I mean, certainly I wouldn't have said that they were from Ardbeg, shall we say. But anyway, I like this. I think it's a lovely nose. It, again, balanced. And you can't say more than that at the end of the day. Fresh, salty, crisp, white fruits. Again, there is more of a slightly medicinal, peaty note kind of coming through now. It's a little astringent, but that I think is kind of tied up nicely within the sort of the peat notes. I think if you kind of look underneath the peat, you do get a sort of, and I'm not being disingenuous here, there is a sort of a bit of a, not rawness again, you can pick out the sort of like the youthfulness of the spirit, shall we say, and it's kind of obvious that by stripping away some of the other cask influences has kind of, I wouldn't say left the spirit kind of dangling, but you kind of like get more of a kind of a feel for where the spirit is at this particular age. And again, like I said, not going to be sort of much older than 4 or possibly 5. And I'm not saying it shows its limitations, but it shows what it's really like at that kind of age. And there is a lovely fruitiness, there is an esteriness, but again, at the end of the day, even saying that, it is still only 4 or 5 years old. And yes, it's gorgeous to drink now, I wouldn't disagree with that, but there is that kind of noticeable youthfulness. But I like it. It's got character. It's fun. It's, you know, it's got a little bit of peat. It's not a stonking peat monster. It's kind of, to a certain extent, true to itself, and it's not trying to be, you know, a peated ale or anything like that. It's just kind of showing the sort of the diversity of the spirit, and you know how it works with these kind of elements. And I love it. I think it's brilliant, and I haven't tasted a poor bottling from the distillery, and well, I think that's testament to the guys that are working there, that are doing an absolutely stunning job. So yeah, good stuff.
I'm standing on the side of the road, watching.
Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Andy for the samples for today's episode of the show, the samples of the Bladnoch. A thank you to Lochlea for a couple of the samples of their releases. Obviously, without you guys' support, individuals, distilleries, distributors, all that kind of thing, there wouldn't be an episode of the show. So I'm obviously highly grateful to everybody that sort of wants to give me samples at the end of the day. I wish I could do more episodes of the show and show more stuff, but obviously that's not possible. But I try at the end of the day, and sometimes it may well take about a year before your samples get onto an episode, but eventually everything gets an airing, as they say. So right, I think the Lowlands, to be honest with you, I think they'd been wholly and utterly overlooked in all this sort of mass distillery building. Everybody wanted to build a bloody distillery on Isla. That was the in place. But it's lovely to see new distilleries cropping up in the Lowlands. And, for years it was basically, Auchentoshan and Bladnoch occasionally, and Denkinchie, and that was it. That was your Lowlands. and I'm not saying that was a bit of a bore show, but it just kind of like was a bit kind of, come on, I mean, it's a huge bloody area, let's have some more distilleries built there, and so it's lovely to see these distilleries appearing, and so many of them, well, I say so many of them, but they all seem to be basically saying, okay, we're trying to sort of create our own spirit in our own style, we have a blank canvas, yada yada yada, and yes, that's very, very true, but they are pretty much going down a very similar kind of route, and I'm not complaining about that, because they're kind of creating the new Lowland style, if you like, and I'm certainly all for that. And when you've got sort of distilleries like Lochlea, Glasgow, Lindors, and so on and so forth, and they're distinctive but similar, if you see what I mean. I mean, it's just like the distilleries on Isla. You can say exactly the same thing, and in Speyside and that kind of thing. They're kind of forging ahead and creating a sort of a new identity for the region in whiskey terms, shall we say? And I think that's a really good thing. So the Bladnoch Vinaya, yeah, absolutely lovely, really nicely balanced. And kind of obviously a great name, in that if vineyard does mean harmonious, which I think it does, very harmonious. The Lochlea Our Barley, yeah, it kind of like sets out what the distiller is trying to do and is just really well priced and an all-round lovely whiskey. The Bladnoch 10-year-old, yeah, this particular 10-year-old, I mean, I don't think that's available anymore, which is a bit of a shame, but there you go, was just absolutely spot-on classic 10-year-old Bladnoch at the end of the day. And, you know, God rest its soul, as they say, or words to that effect. Ploughing, no, the Harvest Edition, sorry. Yeah, again, really nicely balanced, great combination of cask types, along with the spirit, got all of those. What more can you say? The Bladnoch 19, again, you know me and sherry, probably, it was okay, it was good for a sherry, wholly sherry matured or wholly PX sherry matured whiskey, but really, yeah, at the end of the day, not wholly my cup of tea. And the Ploughing edition, again, really intriguing, lovely balance, love a bit of peat, and I think that just worked really nicely. So yeah, I think that was an excellent episode of the show. Like I said, if you haven't picked up a bottle of Lochlea, I would highly recommend that you do so. It's obviously really good value for money, and let's put it this way, we need some really good value for money whiskies these days, it has to be said. So yeah, do so, and if you're going to pick up a bottle, then pick up a bottle from a certain merchant. You know, just do my bit, but of course everything I say today is wholly my own, and you know the rest. Anyway, so I don't think anybody's going to complain about today's episode of the show. I think I've been so effusive it's untrue, hasn't it? So anyway, until next week, hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Good afternoon and good ramming.
Wasting no time.